Hello everybody and welcome to today's tutorial. Today I'm going to teach you guys how to draw hyenas. So the reason why to teach you to draw hyenas, I don't know. It just came with me on a whim, though I am not one myself because I am just a mess here as a hybrid of God knows what. I definitely enjoy drawing these things. I definitely like drawing these for people, and frankly it's a really fun species to draw just because of the shape and how oblong they are. So hyenas themselves are a pretty interesting species, mostly because they look like from a canine species, but actually they're more closely related to cats. They are a part of the Hyenide family, which is ironically more closely related to felines and viperids. And because of that, they have a very interesting shape in comparison to both cats and dogs, and basically any other species in the fandom. Like, we see a lot of variations of canids and vulpins, which are foxes, wolves, and stuff like that, coyotes. And we see a lot of variations in cats, felines, big cats and small cats. And hyenas are in this weird separate category, kind of all on their own, and because of that they're a very interesting species to draw, and frankly need a little bit of finesse when coming up with how to draw them. Let's actually get started. So what I have here is I actually have a drawing or a picture of a hyena. So I'm going to turn the opacity down on this, and we're actually kind of get the idea of where everything is on the body. So first things first, the head. Pretty simple circle. What I actually like to do with hyena heads is they have a very unique shape, and I would actually say that it's more of a perfect equilateral hexagon. So made up of equilateral triangles, and then we have this lower muzzle area right here. Now the muzzle on a hyena is actually pretty big in comparison to most other creatures, including felines and canines. Now the ears have a very unique shape in the sense that they have kind of an upward slant or an upward bow going this way, and then they kind of bow over this way, back down, and then they bow back in right at about the jawline. So they have this very unique kind of shape. Let me just backtrack here a little bit. Just gonna draw it on the other side right there. Eyes, pretty simple. Nose is actually pretty big on a hyena. Like, it's got a pretty heckin' chonkin' nose in comparison to other species. And one really important thing is that the neck on a hyena, especially in its natural form, is actually fairly thick. Like, we're not talking like thick as in protogen thigh thick, but we're talking a thick with a solid C. Not 2 C's, not 3 C's, just a solid single C thick. And it's important to recognize that. One thing that's really cool about a hyena is, though they have a relatively large kind of upper body structure, which kind of splays out into their midriff, there really isn't much shoulder in here. And though I am kind of labeling it out kind of as this small section right here, the shoulder isn't as apparent as on other species like, say, a cat or even a dog. Now the lower legs are going to basically follow the same shape as any other species, both feline and candid, into the paws right here. One thing that's very important to note is that whereas most species kind of have like this upper arching back to kind of keep the entire length of the body relatively horizontal in terms of the horizontal plane, a hyena actually curves down in the back. So we notice a slant back as if it's taking the general shape of the stock market right now. And then that slants into a very low-hanging tail. There's a tail, it's not that big in comparison to both felines and candids, or really anything else that we draw in this fandom, but it's still there and it should be appreciated. We're going to make note that the back legs are going to be smaller than the front legs. That's a super important aspect. I'm just going to draw them as a bow right here because we don't really need to pay that much attention right now. We're just kind of trying to get a general shape of this creature, and then they kind of go down again into the paws. I almost said pobs. I'm slowly sinking deeper and deeper into degeneracy. God can't save me now. Now, a canine will have a very upwards thin waist, getting really, really small around the back legs. So if we go here, it's like that's a canine. But a hyena actually has a very kind of almost uniform to tubby midriff, depending on the physique of the animal itself. And again, this is more in common to a feline anatomy than it is to dog anatomy. Now, we have this general shape, and obviously because we're a bunch of furry degenerates, we're going to want to draw this as a anthropomorphized character. We're going to take the figure that we already have and accentuate it into a bipedal form while still keeping some of the original design elements that we find in the actual species. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start this just how I'd start with any other drawing, is I'm going to draw the action line. Now we're going to start with a very hunched action line because the character itself isn't actually standing straight up because the back of the arch in an actual hyena is a bit bowed. We're going to portray that in our character that we're drawing in a bipedal form. Next, I'm going to draw the chest and rib cage. This I'm actually using a rounded rectangle or or square. Why did I say triangle? It's a rectangle. It's not a triangle. And I just use this more now than I use a sphere or circle. I just find it more helpful. And then we're going to draw the midriff going down into the waist and hip area. Now the hip is going to be drawn as a slightly smaller kind of cube rectangular thing right around here. Now the waist itself is going to be a little bit elongated compared to what you would see in a regular human or a other anthropomorphized creature, and that's because just the midriff of a hyena is a little bit elongated. We're going to do the same thing with the neck going up into the head, kind of following the same action line, with the head being a little bit higher than it would be on most other animals because of the elongated neck that hyenas have. Going to draw the little crosshairs, probably going to increase the circle size a little bit to right around there. Now I'm going to just kind of make a little line going from the front of the neck down and just bringing in the chest that I drew just a teeny bit. Next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create little circles for where I'm going to want the shoulders. Now the important thing about a hyena is that they don't actually have much shoulder, so they're probably going to be a little bit inset right into here. And for the arms, I'm going to draw the first arm, which is going to be on this right side right here. There's a little tendril coming down, just kind of like so. I don't actually use kind of the circle and line technique that I used to use in the past. I just don't find it quite as constructive or intuitive. I find this tendril method is a lot easier to follow. Now, for the placement of the hands, or in this case, these little rectangles that we're going to draw them right at about the lower waistline or the lower hip bone area. So I'm just going to kind of sketch it out right there. Not really put much emphasis on it right now. We'll get to it in later sketches. One thing I am going to do is I'm going to beef up this arm because the upper section of a hyena tends to be a little bit more chunky than the legs tend to be. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to draw just a little rectangle right here to reference where we're going to place the arm on the left side of the drawing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the lower arm because I can't use a single tendril. I'm actually going to draw the lower arm and then attach that to the upper arm. And I'm going to draw this kind of in this weird kite pattern. And I'm just going to attach this to the shoulder socket. Now again, the hyenas don't really have much shoulder IRL, and we're not going to represent that in our drawing either. So we're just going to kind of have it bow and kind of go directly into the neck. Now for the lower legs, this is going to be important because when we draw legs on most other creatures, including humans, we generally use references in terms of how long we want the legs to be. On a regular human, we would normally do it from the lowest end of the hip bone to the top of the head. And then we normally move that down to about the upper part of the hip bone, which is going to be right around there, maybe even a little bit higher, kind of like that top section right there. Now when we draw the legs with this length, we get this really kind of long, elongated figure, and it doesn't really look quite right with that slightly elongated waist area. In fact, it kind of looks a little bit amusing. Now what we're going to want to do instead is we're going to want to make the waist measurement from the upper section of the waist, so like right here, as you can see, kind of, and then we're going to do from the head up there. And that's going to be the measurement we're going to use because a hyena's legs are going to be shorter than you would have on other creatures in the animal kingdom. So we're going to draw this there, and we're going to draw, as you can see, it's a little bit shorter, it's a little bit more understandable, and it matches with the general frame of the hyena a little bit more. So we're going to just draw those little tendrils again, kind of going with the general body shape. This one's going to be facing more out towards us. I'm going to draw little arcs over the top so we kind of get a general idea of where these legs are pointing. And then at the bottom of the legs, we're going to draw these little pyramids for where the feet would go. Just going to clean up the back a little bit, make sure that he's got a decent chonky midriff. All right, so now that this section is done, I'm going to turn down the opacity on that. And okay, so I accidentally did a bunch of layers. So I'm going to turn down the opacity, and we're going to zoom in, and we're going to do the head. I want to focus in on the head real quick on a separate layer, and we're going to add a little bit more detail here. And there are a couple of things that we're going to want to keep in mind when drawing them. So I'm going to draw the eyes. We're going to want them relatively far apart. Not too far apart, just kind of the usual amount that you normally do. I'm just going to clear out right there, and we're going to have them looking, I don't know, to our left. Now, when we're drawing the nose of a hyena, remember that the muzzle itself is pretty big. So normally how we would do like maybe a 1/3 of the size for the end of the muzzle on a cat or a dog. We're actually gonna do it around 1/2 for a hyena because they got pretty heckin' big boopers. I said that with a straight face. I'm tired. In any case, we're going to draw the nose now. Hyenas have pretty honking noses. Some pretty chunky sniffers. That last shroud of dignity that I have is just screaming at me to shut up, but the rest of myself is just going AWOL on this whole tutorial. So enjoy my internal descent into insanity. To draw the nose, we're gonna kind of draw it a little bit bigger than we would normally. So big emphasis on that, on a big booper. So we kind of want to use that cone or cup shape that we would use on pretty much any other animal, which kind of goes a little bit bigger towards the face and a little bit smaller towards the nose. Now, in terms of the bridge between the muzzle and the face, on most animals, you kind of have a pretty abrupt, solid kind of angle right here. On a hyena, you don't. You have a very gradual shift into a more upright position. So we're going to reference that, and we're going to make it a little bit more gradual than we would on, say, a dog or a cat. I reference a dog or a cat because the hyena is kind of like directly in the middle of those two. And we're going to reference the bottom jawline. Now again, on a dog, you'd have a jawline that kind of goes out and then in. So like a little emphasis on the in right here. On a hyena, you don't really have that either. It's very kind of a gradual downward bow. It really helps highlight their physique and kind of how they are different from other animals. So I'm just going to kind of bow it up, and then I'm going to make that go into the jaw, remembering to follow that general hexagon shape. I'm going to outline it right here. I'm going to draw a bit of brow. So let's give this guy a little eyebrows, like right around there, making sure to follow that arc of the bridge of the nose on this side. And then we got the eyebrow. The actual brow muscle goes up a little bit above the eyebrow. We're going to draw the ears here. Remember that ear shape, kind of this curve following parallel to our equilateral hexagon, and then we kind of bring it in on either side to make a slightly outward facing trapezoid. Same thing on the other side, except we're drawing it a little bit farther in, keeping that same general technique. And now, because the ear isn't like a perfectly flat plane, we're going to bring it back in a little bit. So the back of the ear kind of goes in there, and then the inner ear over there, and the inner ear over here. We're going to kind of round out the top of the head, and we're going to give him a little smile. So the smile on a hyena is going to be generally at the halfway point between the nose and the bottom of the chin, and we're going to give him a nice smile right there. Look at that. Look at that happy boy. Going to make the nose decently big. Going to give him 2 nostrils right around there. I think we're pretty good with that. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to kind of focus in on the hands. So on this hand, he has a very outward and kind of probably waving at somebody. So we're going to draw the thumb, like has this triangle extension out here, like so, starting with the triangle and then going outwards. Now for the other hands, we're going to basically treat it like a fan, and we're going to place the 2 kind of pointer finger and pinky finger out on either side of that fan, and then kind of fill in the rest right here. Just kind of finagle it in. like so. Might be a bit big, so we're going to shrink it down a little bit just by kind of cutting off the tops of the fingers. Now we're going to focus in on this other hand right here. Same thing, kind of creating that triangle for where the thumb is going to be. And kind of putting the thumb at the end of that little triangle that we create off of the rectangle. And then we're going to draw the pointer finger, first kind of curve in. Now one thing that I keep in mind when I'm drawing like the fingers after the pointer finger is that they generally follow the same pattern. Your pointer finger is generally going to be the one that's the most outward facing, kind of this way. And then your other fingers kind of start to curl in the farther you go back, with the pinky finger the most curved in. One of the hands aren't necessarily the hardest things to draw, and if you understand that there is a pattern to them, and understanding that pattern will help a lot in making them easier. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of bring in the wrist down to the elbow, and just kind of filling in that kite pattern, and maybe not doing it all the way. We're going to make this curve in with the upper arm, kind of following that same pattern that we had previously. And we're going to fill in the front of the chest over here. One important thing to remember, especially in animal anatomy, is that you still have the shoulder muscles right here and right here. And those shoulder muscles go into the pectorals, which are right around here, but they do it in more of a V shape, especially with that more kind of slender form. This type of anatomy style is something that I learned from Zootopia and some of the techniques that they used on the animals in that movie. And if you notice the animals in that movie, you'll notice that the pectorals follow more of this shape more than anything else. And there really isn't much shoulder on a lot of the characters. You can see this most commonly in Nick and in some of the other big cats. Next thing we're going to do is we also have to remember that there is a muscle going from the back of the neck to the kind of this focal point right at the top of the pectorals. We're just going to kind of line that out just so that we have a better understanding of what's going on. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to basically attach this tendril of an arm to the shoulders, remembering that about at this halfway point you have this little V, this little pocket in your arm, and that's kind of where that kite shape will pop out of. Like so. Zoom out. Now for the rest of the body, one thing we need to remember about the midriff is that on a hyena there isn't really much tonnage, and there's a bit of chunk on a hyena, so we're going to make sure to reference how you would draw fat, and it kind of almost makes a teardrop shape, and we're going to have a little bit of a rotund figure down near the bottom of the waistline and right around the hip area. We're going to draw the back of the rib cage and kind of the back of the character, kind of making sure that it's not necessarily entirely flat, and it does curve in a little bit, but it is relatively flat compared to how we might draw other animals. Between the rib cage and the waist, there's normally more kind of definition between the two. On a hyena, there really isn't going to be much definition between the two. And now we're going to go into the legs. Now for legs, one important thing to remember is that when we draw this kind of tendril shape for this bipedal figure, the reason I use like this biped style is because we understand human anatomy a lot more and kind of how to draw a figure with human anatomy, and we can work off this to create a more digigrade shape for the leg. So normally how you would have kind of a split between the upper leg and the lower leg right here, we're going to want to round that same area, maybe just a tad bit higher for a digigrade leg. Now that we have that kind of area mapped out, we're going to basically draw this upper thigh for a digigrade leg, which is generally going to be just a little bit thicker than a non-digigrade leg. And that's going to go into the lower section. And then you have kind of the paw at this middle point between the tip of the foot and the back of the foot. You're going to have your paw pads or your beans right around there, and then that curves up into the rest of our bipedal kind of figure. Pretty neat. I think it's pretty cool. And this is how I generally come up with digigrade legs. I basically just say, I'm not drawing digigrade legs, I'm drawing plantigrade legs, and just modifying them to a digigrade look afterwards, because it is far easier than trying to come up with digigrade legs on the spot. So we're going to do that here. So I'm basically going to draw down to the halfway point, which is right around here. I'm going to draw a kneecap just so that I have that reference. And then I'm going to basically draw these thicker thighs. And then we're going to draw the paw pad right at that halfway point on that pyramid of a foot. And we're gonna do the same thing on this side. And then we're going to draw the thigh here. One important thing when drawing the thigh from the side, which is what we're doing on this leg, is to not have symmetry. So the buttocks is going to curve more up here and the inner thigh is going to curve down here. They're not perfectly parallel to each other. And if they are parallel to each other, it looks really weird. You'll notice this on humans as well. Now we're gonna draw the lower calf, or lower part of the leg, and that's gonna go directly into our digigrade legs right down here. So we're gonna do this one side, and that is a nice, decent curve. It's a bit long, so I'm gonna just kind of erase and bring it up a little bit, right around there. Now we're gonna do the other side, and because this one's facing just slightly into this way, we're going to have a slight list of the digigrade, but it's not going to be so apparent. So we're basically going to draw it almost in a straight on view, where it's just going to kind of just split off and curve like this. Gonna beef up the leg on this side just a little bit, and maybe bring the paws a little bit bigger in size, because hyenas themselves do have pretty decently large feet and hands. And then we're going to make sure to reference the tail coming off of the back right there. Hyena tails are pretty small, but they are still there and should be appreciated. So we're gonna just kind of make the assumption that they're pretty tiny, or we're gonna just kind of, not really too big, not really too apparent, but it's still got a tail. And we zoom out. One of the key features of a hyena is the fact that it has a mane. Now the mane is actually where you get the main arch of the back from. We're gonna kind of block that out right here. So the mane kind of goes from the back out and is most prevalent right at the shoulder area, and then it kind of goes back in. So we're kind of gonna reference that right here. Now let's give them a little bit of hair right up there. Cool. We just need to block it out. We don't need to put much detail into it. We'll do that later in the lining process, which I'm going to get to right now. So I'm going to speed up the footage right here, and I'm going to narrate my process and what I'm doing while I'm kind of going over this. Yeah, I am tired and don't know how to explain this. Here we go. To start off with, I'm outlining the face. I'm putting the tuft of fur on the top of the head and generally working front to back in terms of the features that I want to outline in the final sketch. I'm keeping the lines on edges that I know would appear and generally ignoring certain sections of the construction where those lines wouldn't be very apparent. I'm remembering to keep a little bit of chub in the belly because that's one of the key features of the hyena. One important thing to note is that with hyenas, they're generally pretty short-furred, or at least spotted hyenas are. And because of this, you're actually going to follow the general figure that you drew in the sketch more than you would, say, with other animals. There we go. I think that's a pretty decent looking Yeeny there. I'm going to now do a bunch of other hyenas just to kind of show that you don't need to just do this one form, and you can do this style of kind of body shape with a bunch of different proportions and still get very similar results. So I'm going to skip forward and do that. So now I'm taking that initial hyena figure and broadening out the shoulders and creating a bit more of a strong or buff-looking hyena, while still keeping the general figure and body proportions that you would see on this species, with the relatively short legs, the relatively linear torso, and the longer head. This is to show that you can take those initial proportions and mess with them a little bit to create something a little bit more unique and a little bit more standout-ish in terms of general design. Now, though we generally see spotted hyenas as the main hyena type, there are actually a couple of others. One of these is the aardwolf. Now, the aardwolf is a petite hyena. It's a small hyena. They're very small. And I honestly got really excited when I realized this. I did not know there was like really, really tiny hyenas, and they're freaking adorable. You should definitely look them up. When I'm drawing this one, I create a slightly more hourglass form because I want to show that this is a female aardwolf. But I'm still keeping that relatively linear torso even in this design. And I'm keeping that extended upper body and squashed lower body to still accentuate the fact that this is a hyena species. And of course, I'm adding more fluff because aardwolves have hella mane, but on the rest of the body, they're still relatively short-haired. So the mane is going to be the most hairy section of this creature. Don't know where I was going with this. Just look up aardwolves, they're cute. Now, in terms of hyenas that generally break the mold, brown and striped hyenas do that quite well. Seeing as their general figure is a bit more dog-like, I wanted to represent that in the drawing that I did of them. Given that, I'm still drawing the character with a figure more indicative to a hyena than a dog, with a stretched upper body and squashed legs, and adding a bit of that torso chunk, even though it's a skinny character. In terms of the fluff on these, it's pretty much just manes, what's on the menu. Manes. They kind of look like they have mullets running down their back. Now, there is also fluff all over the body. These Yeens are super hairy and is a huge aspect of their character design, and I really want to represent that. Anyways, I'm really bad at outros. I don't really know how to end this. Thanks for watching. I hope you know how to draw hyenas now. Stop looking at me.